Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's Daf, which is Eruvin Daf Samach. We are in Nun Tes Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. It says, Umi Omar Rav Nachman Hochi. Now Rav Nachman told us a chiddush. Suppose you have a wall with a ladder leaning against that wall. This ladder provides access over that wall. So what happens? Does that wall become negated and obsolete? Or do we say, well, the wall's still there. The ladder can only help matters. You can consider the ladder, although it's presenting a Pesach, it's creating an entrance and access point. But that's only if it provides benefit. Meaning, it's not inevitable that mechitza has been deemed obsolete. No. Rav Nachman says you apply the concept of a ladder only lekula. If it suits your needs, if you'd like it to be considered a Pesach, then fine. But otherwise, the mechitza is still intact. The fact that there's a ladder that provides access over that mechitza doesn't take away from the din of the mechitza, and we consider the mechitza still to be in place, fully intact, and provides the din of mechitza. Says the Gemara, Umi Amar Rav Nachman Hachi, is that the case? That a sulam, a ladder, can only provide benefit, can only be applied lekula, to our convenience? V'amar Rav Nachman Shmuel. Rav Nachman said the name of Shmuel. Anshe Chotzer v'anshe Mirpesas. Let's say you have a courtyard with several residents living in it, and this courtyard features a Mirpesas. Mirpesas means a balcony, a porch. So you have a Chotzer, you have a porch. The porch was sitting in front of apartments, upper level apartments, who channel out, use that porch to leave their apartments. They walk along the porch, and they have a ladder, a staircase, some sort of way to get down to the chutzner, and then they walk through the chutzner out to the street. So they're really on 2 levels. You have the chutzner, you have the merpeses, 2 separate, distinct areas. Now, what happens if they didn't really join together in an Erev? Anshe Chatzar, v'anshe Merpeses, sheshachachu v'lo irvu. They didn't make a Erev together, a joint Erev. Rather, as Rashi says, each one made their own Erev. The Bnei Chatzar made their own Erev. The Bnei Merpeses made their own Erev. So the question is, do they really need to be included in one Erev? Because they're really residing in 2 separate areas. But the Anshe Merpeses, they come down from their porch and they access the Chatzar as well. They walk through. So the halakha is like this. Im yesh lefaneo daka arba. If in front of the ladder, down on the bottom of that ladder, there's a daka. We discussed the daka concept in Daf Nun Tes. A small Pesach, or so it says a small mechitza. So if this daka is 4 tfachim high, in which case it creates that barrier, a minimal barrier, but barrier nevertheless, which separates the merpeses from the chatzar, then there's no concern. They're considered to be like 2 separate entities, eino yiseres, they don't conflict, and they don't need to be included in the erev of the chatzar. But there's no daka present, in which case we consider the people living up in the merpeses as though they're living down here in the chatzar. They're integrated. It's one usage area. A yiseres, then it creates concern for the Anshe Chatzar, and unless they make an Erev together with them, the Chatzar is Asur B'tiltel. So what's the kasha? Apparently, even a sulam, even a ladder, a staircase coming down from the Merpeses will be considered problematic and create a concern here. Even l'chumra. So this is not really consistent with Rav Nachman, who told us that a sulam can only be used to our benefit. It can't create problems. Here we have a sulam, which is going to connect the merpeses to the chatzar, and it's going to be applied l'chumra. We consider this access point, this sulam, as a connector, even though it results in astringency. Says the Gemara, you know what we're speaking about? But the loigavoya merpes asar. That the entire merpeses wasn't 10 tefachim off the ground of the chatzar. So you have the chatzar, the merpeses is right next to it. So since it's within 10, it's considered to be one in the same area. They're not 2 separate domains. It's not like it's a mechitza between them. They're not removed. They're together. So it's not the sulam which is connecting them. Sulam can't connect things, l'chumra. It's the fact that they're located so close to each other. It's not 10 tefachim high. And that's why they need to have an eruv one with the other. Says in 1 second. If that's the case, if it's not 10 tefachim high, then they're inevitably connected. So what happens if you create this daka, a small pesach, small mechitza, on the bottom of the ladder in the chatzar, to separate the merpeses from the chatzar? It's not going to separate anything. The entire merpeses is deemed to be part of the chatzar because it's within 10. So what's the point of the daka? How can that separate things? Says the gufefes ad eser amis. We're speaking that the merpeses wasn't exposed. It was a railing going around the porch. A railing which creates a mechitza. In which case they're considered to be separate from the chatzar. But what happened was there was some opening in that railing. Ad eser amis. An opening which was up until 10 amis, means 10 amis or less, which creates a pesach in that mechitza. So that pesach gives them access down to the chatzar. And now it depends. If there is no daka there, then they're considered to be connected to the chatzar. But if there's a daka there in front of that pesach, so then that disconnects them. There's no need for them to integrate in the air of the chatzar. They keep in the ovid daka. So once they made that daka to separate them, istaluk lemiyach. They've been separated, disconnected from the chatzar. Therefore it's okay. So the kasha was, because we assumed that, number one, the merpeses was beyond the reach of the chatzar. It was its own entity. The only thing that connected them was the sulam. A sulam can create concerns? According to Rav Nachman, it can't. The answer is, the entire merpeses is so close to the chatzar, it's integrated by virtue of its location. The only thing was, there was a railing which created a mechitza around the merpeses, which separates them, but there was an opening in that mechitza. So now there's a true pesach between the merpeses and the chatzar, not by virtue of the sulam which is connecting them, but by virtue of the fact that the merpeses is so close to the chatzar surface, it's within 10. So that exposed area, that open space, that gap in the railing on that merpeses creates a natural pesach to the chatzar. Forget about the sulam. That itself is a pesach. Because, look, the merpeses, which is so close to the chatzar, is open. Is open to the chatzar. So, irrelevant of the sulam, there's a pesach there. There's a natural pesach there. So now it depends. If they made a daka, they've separated themselves. Otherwise, they're considered to be integrated with the chatzar, and they need to be included in the area of the chatzar. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mashmul. Let's say he takes several ladders, lines them up, puts them against the wall. So we have a chatzar on either side of the wall. And he lines up ladder, lots of ladders lined up against the wall of the chatzar on either side. So it makes this access point between two chatzeros. Afilu bi yeser me'eser. Even there's so many ladders there, they run more than 10 tefachim along that wall. Teres mechitza olav. The wall is still considered intact. Let's take a look at Rashi inside, off to the right. It says Rashi sheretzafa zokav sulam etzel sulam. He lined up ladder next to ladder. So these ladders stretched more than 10 amis along the wall. It doesn't harm things. Teres mechitza olav. The wall is still a mechitza. Ve'ein mevat la mechitza. They don't negate the mechitza. We know that a wall that was actually breached, physically breached, a piritza which is more than Eser Amos, that's more than a Shir Pesach, and it's as though the wall is obsolete. And what happens? The Amila Kaman, we say later on the Gemara, the two chatzeros, one on either side, need to join together because there's no wall there. It's been breached too much. So, if it's physically breached, then you have a concern. But in this case, where the wall is still intact, you have those ladders providing access. In this case, a ladder doesn't negate the wall. It can add an additional element to your benefit. It creates that personal access route, but doesn't take away the physical phenomena. This physical mechitza that's here remains intact. So despite the fact that there are lots of ladders creating this huge access point of more than 10 amas, we don't consider as though the mechitza is gone at that point. Mechitza is still intact. It's merely creating a Pesach. Ella ratzu echad ma'arvin. So it's up to them. If they want to make one Erev due to the fact there's a Pesach, they're fine, they can do that. Ulakula v'avik Pesach. Certainly you can apply a leniency here and consider the Sulam like a Pesach. But ratzu shneim ma'arvin. But if they want, they can make two separate Erevs. Ratzu shneim ma'arvin. They can separate themselves. Why? The lechumra le'amrinan, the levat le'mechitza. So this is the same as we're saying along that a Sulam cannot be applied lechumra. It won't be mevat le'mechitza. The mechitza is still intact. The mechitza was a Pesach. So they have a choice. They can do one Erev together, and they can separate themselves. The chol be'eruvin l'hakol. Whenever we apply these halachas, when it comes to Eruvin, we apply it leniently. So we take a look at this ladder and we say, well, if you're helping matters, fine. Otherwise, we're going to ignore you. So, if they want to have the ladder as a Pesach to enable them to connect each other, fine. But the ladder will not negate the mechitza. Mechitza is still intact. If they choose, they can make their own separate independent Erevs. Continues the Gemara. Is that the case? That a ladder can only apply leniencies, can only be used for our benefit, it can't apply chumras? Ramile Rav Bruna. So Rav Bruna asked Rabbi Yehuda, b'ma'atzart and the oil press, the Rei Rab Chanina. The oil press of Rab Chanina. Mi Amar Shmuel Tors Mechitza Olav. Is that so? That Shmuel holds that a sulam will not negate the mechitza? It can detract from the physical phenomena of the mechitza. It can only be applied l'kula. V'amar Nachman Shmuel, did Rav Nachman say the name of Shmuel himself? And this is the halacha mentioned earlier. Anshe Mepeses, Anshe Chater. We have people living up on the balcony, and people living down the Chater, Sheshachav le'irvu. They forgot to join together in Erev. If there's a daka placed in front of the bottom of that ladder, coming down from the Mepeses, then they don't interfere. They're considered to be a separate entity, and the Chater is allowed to carry throughout the Chater, without concern of the Bnei Merpeses. V'im lav oiseres, but without a daka, then the Merpeses conflicts, and it's as though they're living down here, they need to be included in the Erev. So what do we see? That a ladder creates concerns. The ladder effectively brings them down here. Although they're sitting up in their Merpeses, the fact that there's a ladder here, that creates a Pesach, negates the mechitza, so to speak, and negates the fact that they're living in their own area. It connects the two entities, and they're required to integrate in an Erev. So you see that a ladder is not just a kula. We're speaking about like Gvam Pes Asara, as we mentioned earlier, the Pesas was intent of the Chatzar, and that's what created the concern, not the ladder. If that's the case, what's the point of the daka? How's the daka going to change matters here? They're within the Chatzar area. This little daka will separate them? Says the Gemara, we're speaking about the Chatzar featuring this railing, which created a separation between them and the Chatzar. But it was open on one side up until Tan Amais, which created a Pesach. So that in itself creates a connection between the Mepeses and the Chatzar, because it's an opening and they're within 10 to the Chatzar. So it's not like a Pesach between two Chatzeres, in which case they have a choice. Well, if we choose to connect, fine. If we choose to be separate, fine. In this case, since the Pesach is where? It's on a Pesach which is within 10 Tfachim to the Chatzar. That connects them. They're too close to even have the choice. They don't have the option to separate. So in this case, it depends. The kivan of a daka is taluki is talak macha. So once they made a daka to denote separation, and that effectively separates them, and they don't interfere with the chatzah. So this is unrelated with any halachas of sulam, of staircases. The connection here is due to the fact of their close proximity. But certainly, a sulam is only going to be something which provides benefit It does not detract from a din of a mechitza. Continues the Gemara. Hanu b'nei kakunoi. There were these residents of the town Kakunoi. The asu l'kamei de Rav Yosef. They came before Rav Yosef. Armole, they told him, Havron Gavra, to l'arav lan masin. Do you have somebody to establish an Erev for our city? Armole Abaye. So Rav Yosef turned to Abaye, his Talmud. He says, Zil aravlu, go establish an Erev for them. V'chazi, but make sure that this doesn't create an uproar, a backlash in the base measure. Do it properly. Don't create complications. Also, Sabai went along. Chaza, he took a look and he noticed Lahanu Bati the Psich Nahara. So this was a city which was an Ir Sharab. Required a shir, as we mentioned that from Tess, a publicly owned city does not allow enacting one singular Erev throughout the entire city. The point was because it appears like there's just a rabbim, and if we allow one single Erev to be established throughout the city and allow carrying freely, this might lead to confusion. One might erroneously conclude from this that you can carry in a rabbim. So you must leave a portion of the city which is out of the Erev zone, not connected to the general Erev. Rashi in the Mishnah there said they can make their own Erev, but you can't transfer from one to the other. They need to be separate, which will send that message and explain to all, look, the reason for carrying the city is due to an Erev. We want to advertise this Erev factor here. So this city, this Kakunoi city, was a Ir Sharam, which required a shir. Now Abaye noticed, he noticed these several homes which were open to the river. So they were separate from the rest of the city because they had no access to the city. Their backs was closing; they were closed off completely. They didn't have access to the city. So he said, "Look, let these homes be considered the remnant, the shir. I'm going to leave them out of the erev." Omar hani lahav shir lamasa. Let these homes be considered a shir for the rest of the city, and the rest of the city can be included in one erev. Now the problem is that these homes couldn't even potentially connect to the city of the erev of the city. Why? Because they have no access to the city. So the question is, are they considered a shir? So that was his question. Hada Amar, then he reverted. He said, look, it doesn't appear that these things are qualified for a shir. The Mishnah says you can't make an erev throughout the entire city, which denotes mechlal that if you wish, they can be included in the erev. Meaning, what is considered a remnant, a shir, a leftover? Something that can be connected, and you choose to keep it separate. So that highlights the fact that you're fulfilling the takana, the chachamim. You're leaving something, you're consciously leaving something out of the erev. You fulfill the takana. But in a case where, in any case, these homes couldn't be connected, that's not called fulfilling the din of the Rabban. You haven't left anything out of the erev. By default, they've been left out. Therefore, this is not considered to be a fulfillment of the takana. Ella, rather, kavi. I'm going to design some windows in those homes. So I'm going to break some windows in the back of those homes, which is like a Pesach, which will connect them to the city. Because in that case, they have the potential to make an erev through the windows. So since they have potential to connect, they are qualified to serve as a shir. They can connect, so leaving them out is considered to be a shir for the city. So we must go ahead and break some walls there. Hadarma. Then when he said, no, I changed my mind. It's not necessary, because even if it doesn't have potential connection, that's still considered to be a shir. I'll bring you right. The Rabbi Baravua ma'arav l'kula mechayza arsiyaisa arsiyaisa. Rabbi Baravua enacted an erev throughout the entire city of Mechayza, neighborhood by neighborhood. Why in that manner? Mishum pira de beturi, because in between these neighborhoods there were these ditches, these furrows, which contained date pits for the oxen, animal feed. So pira means these ditches, the beturi, the animal feed which contained in them. So these barriers, these ditches between the between the neighborhoods formed a natural mechitza, a natural barrier, and didn't allow him to make an eruv throughout the entire city as one, because they're separate neighborhoods. They're separated by these pure debaturi, these ditches for the animal feed. So Rabbi Baravua made separate eruvs throughout the entire city. Now, how did he do that? How did he make the entire city included in eruv? Because there was shear. There was some remnants. There was some parts out of the eruv, meaning because it was separated into neighborhoods. So each neighborhood was considered to be a shear for the other neighborhood. Each one formed a shear for the other one. Therefore, he was able to establish an eruv throughout the entire city, even though it was an Irsha Rabim, which requires shear. There was shear here because it wasn't one singular eruv throughout the entire city. It was separated into neighborhoods. Now, let's take a closer look at that town. Does that town have potential connectivity? No. Due to the natural barriers formed between the town, between the neighborhoods. Even though in that case, if they should wish to connect with each other, they had no option to do so. Nevertheless, we see that was considered to be a valid shear. So you see, this element of potential connectivity is not required. The fact is, you're leaving something out of the general eruv, and you don't allow transfer from one point to the other. That calls attention to the eruv factor, and eliminates confusion and erroneous conclusions that you're carrying because you're allowed to carry Shizarab. Everybody sees it's due to the eruv factor. So that was Abayi's raya from that story of Mechayza, and therefore he says there's no need to crack holes through those walls of the homes facing the river. They can be considered a shear, despite the fact they have no potential connectivity to the city. Hadrama. Then he reverted again. He said, no, my proof from the story of Mechayza is unsubstantiated. Loy dami, there's no comparison. Hasam, in that case, iboy la ruv derech gagos. If they want, iboy, if they would wish, la ruv derech gagos, to be ma'arif through the rooftops. So Rashi says there was some rooftops, some detoys, he says some of these balconies that were going from one house to the other, from one neighborhood to the other. So there was some physical connection between one and the other, which would allow them theoretically to connect to each other. So since there was a theoretical connection here, they had potential connectivity. That's why it's considered to be a shear if it's left out of there. In contrast to our case of these homes facing the river, they have no option of connecting to the city. Therefore, they cannot be deemed a shear. Hilkach na'avdan kavi. Let's make for them windows. Ha'adarami. Then he changed again. He says, no, kavi nami loiboy. They don't even require windows. Why? Because potential connectivity is not required. And he brought a raya from the city of Pumpadisa. Tahu Beitivna, there was this silo, this grain, this hay silo. Davale lamar bar pupidsa bepumpadisa. So the fellow bar Pupidsa, who was the owner of this silo, from the town of Pumpadisa, v'shav yeshir lePumpadisa, and he made it this Beis HaTeven, which is not really a makam dira, it doesn't require eruv. He deemed it a shir for the town of Pumpadisa. This was considered to be a remnant out of the eruv, and allowed establishing an eruv throughout the rest of the city. So apparently, even something which doesn't have potential eruv, if it's left out of the eruv zone, that's considered to be fine. Some say, some Rishonim say that it was actually a base dira, was a dwelling, but it was not connected to the city. It was similar to the homes in the river, on the river. So in any case, it means a right from here that potential connectivity is not required. So therefore, he left things alone, and he established an eruv throughout the entire city of Kalkanoi by considering those homes along the river as the shear, the remnant for the city, and everything is fine. Omar, so as a result of this whole back and forth, Abaye concluded, he said, Hainu de Amar Limar. Now I understand what Rav Yosef was referring to when he said, Chazi, make sure doesn't bring a backlash, cause uproar in the Beis Medrash. Taisus explains, because if you would have to break those walls unnecessarily, It would have created backlash and uproar. Good thing I didn't resort to that. I paid close attention and did it properly without causing undue complications. Continues the Gemara. So Eir Shirabim requires a shear. How large a shear? A machlekes. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the portion of the city out of the Erev zone needs to be equivalent to the Ir Chadasha. The Rabbi Bartanura says this was the smallest size city in the Yehuda zone of Eretz Yisrael. That was determined by the Chachamim as a properly sized city, as a properly sized portion of a city, which was considered a proper shear to send a message to all. Tanya Amar Yehuda Ir Achas Yehuda v'Chadasha Shema. So there was a city in the area of Yehuda and Yisrael called Chadasha v'Hayiba Nun de Yurim, which featured 50 residents, Anoshim v'Nashim v'Tav, between men, women, and children. V'Vayu Mesharim Chachamim, and the Chachamim used this example of this city as your benchmark, as your formula, meant to be applied to every city. This is considered to be a shear, a large enough sized area which is going to be left out of the area, which sends that message. V'hiya is a shear, and actually that city itself formed a shear, a remnant, for a large city next to it. So it itself also served that purpose. There was a large city next to this Ir Chadasha, and they created an Erev throughout the large city, leaving this Ir Chadasha out of the Erev zone, and that provided shear to allow Erev through the other city. Iboilu Chadasha Mao. What about this very city Chadasha? Does it need its own shear? So this small city was situated next to the large city. Now the large city had its own Erev. The question is, this small Ir Chadasha, does it allow making an Erev throughout it? Or do you need to leave something in the city itself? So why would you need to leave another shear? Let's remember the large city had its own Erev. So that itself is separate from the Ir Chadasha, right? You had a large city, a small city, each one having its own Erev. So each one can be considered a shear for the next city because it's being left out of the other city's Erev zone. Says the Gemara, Chadasha ki yechid iyu have a shear l'gedolah, just as it was serving as a shear for the larger city, it was kept out of the area of the larger city. Gedolah nami have a shear l'ktana. Likewise, the large city situated next to it formed a shear for the ktana because it was left out of the area of the ktana. There's no concern there. Of course, you can make an area for the gedolah, an area throughout the ktana. Rather, the question applied to a different scenario entirely. Let's say you have just a plain city on its own, which has similar size to the Ir Chadasha. It's 50 residents. The question is, even though it's an Ir Shirabim, but since it's so small in size, perhaps the Chachamim's concern about confusing this with Ir Shirabim won't apply here when it's such a small size city. Rav Huna, Rav Yehuda, between these two, Rav Chadam and Bayishir, one maintains even this small-sized city needs to have a shear, need to leave a portion of the city out of the Erev. V'chad Amar, the other shita says, Loi Bayishir, this tiny city does not need its own shear. It doesn't appear like a Rosh Hashanah, therefore, you can make one Erev throughout the entire city without any concern. This is Shita Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that a shear must be equivalent in size to the Ir Chadasha, which had 50 residents. Rabbi Shimon Omer, the remnant could be even smaller in size. Gimel Chatzeres v'chul, 3 courtyards with 2 houses each. Amar V'cham Guri Amar Rav, halacha Rabbi Shimon. That's how the halacha concludes. Rabbi Yitzchak Amar, he has a third sheet. Afilu bayis echad v'chutzar achas. Even if the leftover portion, the shear, only comprises one house, v'chutzar achas, or one courtyard, that's okay. Says how can you say one courtyard? If it doesn't have a home, it's not a dwelling area. It can't be considered a shear for the city. All he meant to say was that even if you have one home within one courtyard, that is also enough to be considered a shear. So there are 3 shears. Rabbi Yehuda says it needs to be the same size as the Ir Chadasha. Shimon says 3 courtyards, 2 houses each. And Rabbi Yitzchak adds another sheet to even one house in a courtyard. Only Abai Rav Yosef. Had Rabbi Yitzchak Gemara or Svar? This quote of Rabbi Yitzchak, one house in a chatzar, is this something of a Gemara that he accepted from his teachers? Or Svar, or was it something that he himself suggested? His own Svar. Amalei, so Rav Yosef responded, "My nafkala mina, what difference does it make?" Because in either case, we just concluded halacha follows Reb Shimon. So we're not following the shita in any case. What's the difference if it's something he accepted and received from his Rebbeim, or he originated on his own? Amalei Gemara Zmartate. It's like a person says, learn your Gemara. Zmartate, learn it like a song. I'd like to know. I need to have accuracy here. I need to know where this shita is coming from. Perhaps it can be applied elsewhere. We have to know the precise source of this shita. Therefore, I questioned whether it was a Gemara or something which he originated on his own. Okay, so in summary, we learned that an Ir Sharabim requires a sheer part of the city needs to be left out of the Eruv. Now, the Gemara concluded that even if that section that you're going to leave out of the Eruv can't even have potential connectivity to the city, that's okay. The fact is that it's being left out of the Eruv, you can't transfer there, and that serves to highlight the fact that there's an Eruv factor playing here, which allows carrying through the city, and this will eliminate confusion and erroneous application of this hetatiltu to a standard shtaram. How large a shir must be established? We have three shittas. Rabbi Yehuda says 50 residents. Shimon says 3 chatzeris with 2 houses each. And Rabbi Yitzchak says even one house in a chatzer. Continues the Mishnah. Misha haya b'mizrach v'amar levnoi arev li b'marav. So this fellow standing to the east, and he asks his son to make him an erev, to establish an erev tchumen out to the west. Or b'marav, he's standing in the west. V'amar levnoi, and he instructs his son arev li b'mizrach, establish for me an erev tchumen in the east. Says the Mishnah, Im yesh heimenu lebeisei al payimam. Now, if the distance between this person and his home during the point of Bein Hashmashos, of course, that's when things get established. So at that point, if he's within 2,000 amma of his real home, ulei ruva yosim mikan, but the distance between him and his Erev that his son has set down for him is more than 2,000 amma. In that case, he cannot be kohen shvisa there, because it's beyond his 2,000 limit. So what happens then? Mutal beisa. He's allowed to have his home, meaning the home remains his makam shvisa. He retains the territory, the tchum around his home, because he was within reach of his home during Bein Hashmashos. So that remains his makam shvisa, v'aseh liruvay, and he does not get the tchum pertaining to the Erev Tchumen that his son established for him, because it was out of bounds. During Bein Hashmashos, it was beyond 2,000. So that Erev is ineffective. So what happens? He retains his old former Makam Shvisa, which is his home. What about in the reverse case? Leiruve Alpayim Amma. If during Bein Hashmashos he was to be found within 2,000 of the Erev, Lebeisa Yasher Mekan, and more than 2,000 from his home, in this case, just the opposite will happen. He doesn't have the shvis of his home, but he gets the shvis of the Erev. That becomes his place of residence, and he attains the tchum of 2,000 around the bread of the Erev. A person places Erev within the Ibur, the extension, the 70 and 2/3 amma extension of the city, which is considered to be like part of the city. So if he places Erev within a bias that was situated within this municipal boundary of the city, it's worthless. It's ineffective because it's his city regardless. This is his place of residence. He hasn't really accomplished anything. If he places it out of the tchum, even if it's just 1 amma out, the Gemara will tell us actually this was out of the 70 amma boundary, meaning not out of the 2,000 amma boundary, which in case he doesn't have any shvisa because it's out of bounds. So he placed it out of the Ibur, in which case it's considered to be a valid Erev. So even if it was just one amma out of the Ibor, it's effective, and what happens? That becomes his Makom Shvisa, and he acquires the Tchum of 2,000 amma in each direction of the Erev. Masheniskar hu mafsid. So what he gains on one side of the city, he loses on the other. Let's take a look at Rashi inside, on the top line. So Rashi, Masheniskar l'ruach zeh, when he gains to one direction, nifsad l'rosh connected. He's going to lose on the other side. Why? Because he needs to measure 2,000 amma in all directions of the Erev. What happens if you placed it at the 1,000 amma mark to the east of the city? So until where can he walk? He can walk another 2,000, which is a total of 3,000 from the city. So he gained an extra 1,000. Right? So this was the city. And he put his Erev 1,000 amma from the city. That becomes his Makam Shvisa. Allows him to walk another 2,000 for a total of 3. Now, how much can he walk in the other direction, to the other side of the city? Only 1,000. So the area which was established, let's say to the east of the city, 1,000 amas to the east, gives him 2,000 beyond that way, and 2,000 this way. So he has 1,000 back to the city. He skips over the city, because the city is not included in the calculation, only counts like 4 amas. And he has an additional 1,000 to the other side, instead of the 2,000 he would have had if he would not establish the Erev there, because when he's in the city, he has 2,000 either direction. The fact that he established an Erev, 1,000 amma to the east of the city, gives him 3,000 amas to the right of the city, to the east of the city, and leaves him only 1,000 to the other side. So that's what the Mishnah means. Masheniskar or mafsid. Whatever he gains on this side, he has to give up on the other side. And he loses 1,000 on the other side, meaning his boundary has been brought down from 2 to 1, because that's the only thing he has left from the boundary of his area. What's the point of this? What the Mishnah is teaching us, isn't this pretty obvious? The Mishnah is teaching us, we don't calculate the city into the total amount. It doesn't get deducted from the tchum. Rather, we treat it like 4 amas, because it's a single place of residence. A city is one entity. It's like 4 amas. So he's going to have an additional 1,000 to the mar of the city. We don't reckon the actual area of the city. We don't deduct that from his tchum. Continues the Gemara. So the Mishnah began by telling us there was a father with his son. The father was b'mizrach, and he tells his son, Arev li b'marav, establish an Erev in the west. Or he was in the west, told his son, establish the Erev Tchumen in the east. The Gemara figures, what is east and west in relation to? It's relative to his home. So let's say he has a home here, and he's standing to the east. Tells his son, place an Erev to Marav of the home, other side of the home, or vice versa. Now the Mishnah tells us that it depends on where he's situated. It's going to affect the results here. Meaning, if he is within 2,000 of the home of his home, and beyond 2,000 of the Erev, and the Erev, it can be valid because it's beyond his reach, then he attains or he retains the shvis of his home. What if he is within 2,000 of the Erev, but beyond 2,000 of the home? Then the reverse happens. He gets the shvis of the Erev, but not of his home. He loses the shvis of his home, and it's replaced by the shvis of the Erev. Now, if the situation was as we just described, the home is in the middle, he is standing to the east of his home, and his son is placing an Erev to the west of his home. So the first scenario is probable. It's within 2,000 of the home, but beyond the reach of the Erev, which is all on the other side of the home. But the second scenario, how is that going to work? That he's within 2,000 of the Erev, but beyond 2,000 of the home? How's that possible? He's closer to his home than to the Erev, which was situated beyond his home. Says Mokasal Gedaitach, we figured, Lemizrach Beisai. East here is in relation to his home. He is standing to the east of his home, and he's telling his son, place an Erev Lemarav Beisai. Marav here means to the west of his home. So certainly that description that this person is situated within 2,000 of his home, but beyond 2,000 of his Erev, that can certainly be found, that's probable. The Matil Beisil, Matil Ruvay. He can reach his home because it's within 2,000, but can't reach his Erev, which is lying beyond his home, and beyond 2,000. So that situation is probable. But the second description, that he is situated within 2,000 of his Erev, but beyond 2,000 of his home, how is that to be found? It seems to be an impossible scenario. Do you think that the Mishnah, when mentioning Mizrach and Marav, it's relative to his home? It's his relative position relative to his home? No. It's unrelated to his home. We're not discussing his home. Like, Mizrach b'noi. Marav b'noi. Mizrach means he was standing to the east of his son. And he tells his son, place an Erev to the west. Marav means he was Marav of his son, and he told his son, place an Erev to the east. It's unrelated to his home. We don't know where the home is. And therefore, both situations can work out. Rav bar Shila Amar, afilu tema lemizrach beis, ulemar beis. Even if you interpret Mizrach as in relation to his home, and Marav in relation to his home, it still can work out. How? How can we find a case where he is closer to his Erev than to his home? That his home was situated at an angle. Meaning we have the home here, and this fellow was standing to the east of his home, but not directly to the east. Off, at an angle southeast. So he's standing here, and he tells his son, Arav libe Marav. Establish him an Erev to the west, meaning southwest. Or in the reverse, he's standing southwest, and he tells his son, place for me an Erev southeast of the home. So Mizrach and Marav is in relation to the home. But it's not directly opposite the home, in which case we have a problem how to figure out the Mishnah. Rather, we're speaking at an angle. So let's say he's standing to the east, southeast of his home, and his son established an Erev for him southwest of his home. It's very possible that the distance between him and the home could be a greater distance than between him and the Erev. Why not? Therefore, that scenario certainly can take place. And now we understand the halacha of the Mishnah. That if he's beyond 2,000 of his home, but within 2,000 of the Erev, and the Erev has been activated, and that becomes his Makom Shvisa instead of his home. Continues the Gemara. If you place it within the confines of the municipal boundaries of a city, it doesn't work. But he placed it out of the Tchum, it's okay. Out of the Tchum, meaning beyond 2,000 of a city, that's out of bounds. He has no access to his Erev. That Erev is invalid. The Mishnah simply meant that he placed it out of the Ibur, meaning out of the 70 Amazon. And over there, it's considered to be a proper Erev. What happens? Whatever he gains on one side of the city, he must give up on the other side. But as Rashi pointed out for us, that the city itself only accounts for 4 amas. He doesn't have to deduct the entire area of the city from his tchum. Says more, is that the case? Is that really so that the city is merely regarded like 4 amas? Mashiniska v'shaloi? He only has to give up on the other side of the city what he gained on this side, but the city itself is not reckoned with. V'atanya, hanois ne'seruvay b'sechi bur shalir, lo yosef lo klum. If one places an air within the 70 amma of the city, it's worthless. Place it outside the Ibur. Afilu amma achas. Even if it's just 1 amma out, it works. And what happens? He gains that. Meaning it allows him to walk that additional amma. Umaf says kula. But he loses the entire city, which is deducted from his tchum territory. the area of the city is accounted for in the Tchum. So this contradicts our Mishnah. It says in Malay Kasha, the answer is like this. It depends on the situation. Kasha calls midase bechatzir. The Brisa which tells us that the actual area of the city is reckoned, is calculated as part of the Tchum, is speaking where the Tchum, the 2,000, terminated in the middle of the city. So it didn't really envelop the city. It didn't cover the entire city. So he places area outside the city and he's counting his 2,000 and it's right in the middle of the city. He has to stop there. But let's say somehow the Erev arrangement allowed him to calculate 2,000 and that 2,000 ended beyond the city, in which case the entire city was included in the Tchum. Then this becomes, that's considered like one place of residence, one unit, because it's within the confines of his territory, and therefore we regard it like 4 amos. So it depends on the situation. The Mishnah is speaking where the 2,000 amma terminated beyond the city, it covered the entire city and beyond, in which case the entire city now is merely regarded like 4 amos because it was included in the Tchum. It's part of his territory, part of his domain. We deem it like just one residential area, like one unit of 4 amos. But in a case where the 2,000 ended somewhere in the middle of the city, rather than at the end of the city, in that case, it must stop right there. We reckon with the area space of the city itself, and it is accounted for. It is deducted from his 2,000. So, like Kasha, the answer is like this: Kasha calls for midase bechatzir. The Brisa, which tells us that the city is accounted for, is when the midah, the tchum measurement, terminated somewhere in the middle of the city. Kan, our Mishnah, which says that the city is not accounted for, merely is treated like 4 amos, is speaking shekol midase b'seifir. When the 2,000 amma terminated at the end of the city, in which case the entire city is included in the Tchum, and is regarded like 4 amos. Let's take a look at Rashi right off to the left. Shekol midase b'chatzir. Says Rashi, Ma'aseh ir gedola. Why did the 2,000 end in the middle of the city? Because it was a huge city. Or his ear was placed so far from the city, in which case the 2,000 didn't cover the city, it ended right in the middle of the city. In which case the city was not included, was not enveloped within the 2,000 amma. In this case the city is accounted for and is deducted from the calculation, from the total of his territory. And he loses that territory, meaning it must be calculated as part of the Tchum. But if the entire city is enveloped within its 2,000, in that case it's only regarded like 4 amos. You don't deduct. You don't have to allow for the territory of the city itself. You treat it merely like 4 amos. Says the Gemara, this concept we find by Rav Idi. The Omer Rav Idi this fellow was measuring his Tchum, he's counting his 2,000. And his 2,000 ended right in the middle of the city. That's all he has. He can't go any further. Because the portion of the city, which he has already measured, is calculated as part of his total. So his 2,000 end right there. But 2,000 ended at the end of the city, in which case the entire city has been enveloped within his territory. The city is treated merely like 4 amos. And we let him finish the remainder, meaning whatever's left of your 2,000, keep on counting. The city is only considered like 4 amos. You only have to count for that much. If you deduct 4 amos for the city, the rest of the Tchum, you can continue measuring beyond the city. Amar of Iti, I don't understand this distinction between the Tchum ending in the middle of the city, in which case the city is not like 4 amos, or if it ends at the end of the city, it is 4 amos. What's the difference between one and the other? Ein elu helo divrei nevius. These words of Rav Idi, the name of Shimon Levi, seem to me like words of prophecy. It doesn't seem to be rational. And he must have accepted, it must have received it from his teacher as an absolute halacha. It's not something that I can really explain. Mali kosa b'chatzir. What difference does it make if his Tchum terminated in the middle of the city? Mali kosa b'seifir. Or if it terminated at the end of the city. What's the difference between one and the other? Is it a city 4 amos or not 4 amos? I have no way of explaining this distinction between one case and the other. Amar Rava Tarvayu Tanani. Both halachas, meaning both scenarios, were actually learned in the Mishnah, which indicates for us that this distinction is true and correct. as Be'ez Hashem we're going to see in the next daf. Okay, time for a brief chazorah of today's daf. Gemara began discussing the concept of a sulam, a ladder leaning against a wall. Rav Nachman told us the name of Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda told us the name of Shmuel. That can only be used for our benefit. It doesn't negate a mechitza, l'chumra. It doesn't necessarily detract from the power of that physical mechitza that is present there. The ladder allows for access. So, when it helps us, and it's to our benefit, we make use of that ladder. But it will not be applied when it creates a chumrah and detracts from the mechitza and the power of the mechitza. As Rashi says, the chol be'Eruvin lahakel, we apply leniencies when it comes to Eruvin. Therefore, if it helps us, fine. Otherwise, we ignore the ladder. The Gemara discussed the concept of shir. So this ir shel rabim needs to have some portion of the city which is not included in the general eruv, to call attention to the fact that the carrying allowance in the city is due to the presence of an eruv, lest one confuse things and say, well, look, we're carrying an Rosh Hashanah. How large a shir must be left out of the eruv? Rabbi Yehuda says 50 residents. Rabbi Shimon says 3 courtyards, 2 houses each. Rabbi Yitzchak says even 1 house in the courtyard. And the Gemara concluded from that whole story of Abai and Rabbi Yosef that the sheer portion that you're going to leave out of the eruv doesn't need to be an area which has potential connectivity to the city. Even if it doesn't have the option of connecting to the city, that is also considered to be a sheer, as long as you leave something out of the eruv of the city. It calls attention to the eruv concept and removes any concern of confusion. We proceeded with the Mishnah and the Gemara, which told us that an eruv which is placed within the ibur shel ir, within the municipal boundary of a city, is invalid. You haven't done anything. It's in the city. That's where you reside. So you haven't placed an eruv outside the city. But if you place it outside the city, then you calculate matters. Well, whatever territory you gain on one side of the city, you have to give up on the other. However, regarding the area space of the city itself, is that reckoned or not? That depends. The Gemara concluded that if the 2,000 amma boundary ends in the middle of the city, then in that case you have to reckon the part of the city that you calculated as part of your tchum. But if the tchum ended at the end of the city, in which case the entire city is enveloped in your tchum, in this case, you don't have to account for the entire space of the city. Rather, you treat it merely like 4 amis, considered to be one residential unit, one space which has a din of 4 amis, and that's all you have to deduct from your eruv, and resume your calculation beyond the city. How do you differentiate one and the other? This seems to be like words of prophecy, and Rabbi responds, actually, this is sourced in the Mishnah, as we're going to see the next blog, Be'ez Hashem.